Um, Hello, everyone. First I want to thank Damien for putting together this fascinating panel and having me on. And also thank Peter and the organizers for making this conference accessible to Australia. Though ironically, I'm not in Australia at the moment. I'm in France and it is very, very late. But today I want to talk about some research that came out of a project I did last year on the online market for Southeast Asian antiquities. So I want to also acknowledge UNESCO Jakarta for supporting this research. This was a preliminary survey that I did on the online landscape in which Southeast Asian objects are being traded to kind of look at how it's affecting demand and looting as a result. So what I did was I surveyed online auctions on Sotheby's, Christie's, Live Auctioneers, which kind of represented what I think of as a more formalized art market online. And then I surveyed Etsy, which I think of as a relatively new player in the art and antiquities market, so e-commerce marketplace. Etsy specifically, for those who don't know, is a marketplace for handmade items and craft supplies and vintage goods, hence the title. And these e-commerce marketplaces are changing the demand for antiquity by offering different kinds of objects, but also they encourage different kinds of people to participate in the trade, more buyers and more sellers. And there's already been a lot of good research on this topic, and it's shown that the online market is very accessible to these new collectors. And because it's easy to navigate relative to the more traditional world of auction houses, there are really few barriers to entry. Most e-commerce platforms only require an email to sign up for it. And on the seller side, they help with things like processing payments, shipping, marketing. It's also accessible because the objects are cheaper, smaller, and easier to ship, and also available in staggering quantities. My survey just kind of confirmed this. Most of the Etsy shops I surveyed had between 100 and 1,000 objects in stock, with an average of about 400. But one shop had over 2,000 objects available at the time of the survey. And they do tend to be smaller things like jewelry and beads, small pottery, including shipwreck ceramics, as well as small like ceremonial weapons and tools and that kind of stuff. About 70% of the over 500 objects I surveyed were offered for under 500 US dollars. But what I also found is that Etsy seems to be a really important portal through which objects are leaving Southeast Asia for the first time. When I conducted the survey, I looked for, yeah?
Charlie, sorry, you're having some weird slowdown of your speech. Could you, you sound good now, so could you start on that slide again and say what you were saying? Sorry.
Sorry, I have been having some issues with my internet today, so hopefully
fair enough.
It sticks. So what I was saying is that I have also found that Etsy seems to be an important portal through which objects are leaving Southeast Asia for the first time. So what I did when I did the survey is I just went on the Etsy homepage and looked for Southeast Asian using the search bar and filters. And then once I had Southeast Asian objects and identified those objects, I clicked through to the seller's shops to look at the rest of their stock, as well as any information they had posted about their location. So I found that about 67% were located in Southeast Asia. And when I look at their full inventory, I saw that most of the time they only sold or mostly sold Southeast Asian objects. So another way to think about it is Southeast Asian objects for sale on Etsy are being sold by Southeast Asian dealers more often than not. And then you add to that the fact that none of the listings on Etsy have any sort of provenance or documentation. And many, in fact, outright say that the objects were recently excavated, which I will get back to in a bit. So it does seem to indicate to me, at least, that many of the objects available on Etsy are entering the market for the first time. So yeah, we're seeing new kinds of objects entering the market and new kinds of collectors. And that's kind of where I want to focus on today. For the rest of this presentation is like, how are these sellers, but also the buyers communicating on the platform on Etsy? So my approach is inspired mostly by the sociologists who work on the production of culture, mainly Howard Becker and Pierre Bourdieu. And I'm also informed by the work of cultural criminologists like Jeff Farrell, Martin O'Brien, and Annick Brière. So I will try not to spend too much time on this because I want to get to the examples, but what they have in common is a focus on relationships between the cultural producers, and also a very big concern with image and symbolism and the circulation of information within a given group. So Becker's art world and Bourdieu's field of cultural production view art as it's a social and cultural production rather than an aesthetic one. And so they look at the way in sources are mobilized to create meaning that gives value to objects. Cultural criminology also looks at the whole of an environment in which crime occurs and also focuses on these like social and cultural forces that shape behavior, in this case, criminal behavior. And it has been used in studies of white collar crime often because it also addresses concerns with symbolic interaction, status, signals, images. So it's looking at the ways in which crime is framed and socially constructed and understood. So with this in mind, I want to look at some listings and reviews of 3 of the shops that I surveyed on Etsy. 2 are based in the US and 1 in Vietnam. These are stores that have had large quantities of objects. So you can see on my slide, shop number 1 has sold over 10,000 objects since the beginning of 2014, and shop number 3 has just over 1,000 items currently available, or at least available as of last week. So very large quantities on these in these shops. The one thing to note though is that these 2 shops, shop 1 and 3, don't exclusively deal in antiquities. They both seem to work with artists and artisans in their local communities, and they sell their art on Etsy on their behalf, as well as selling historical objects. And when I analyzed the listings from these shops, I found what looked like a contradictory phenomenon. So both Etsy as a platform and the sellers individually put in a lot of effort, obviously, in creating value so they can sell their objects. But I found that some of the language that they use seems to downplay the certain object's value. And even more weird, baffling is that many of the sellers seem to outright admit to looting, or at least to be aware or involved in unethical practices. So I'll first start with basically the first information that you get as a buyer at Etsy next to the photo is the pricing and all of these things that are kind of like highlights. The rarity of the object is emphasized in 3 places, which you can only kind of see 1 here, but first is the red in the price, only 1 available. Oh, there's 2 here, sorry. 1 available, and then the next one is rare find with the little sparkly unicorn icon. And then if you stay on the page for long enough, there's a pop-up that comes out of the left side of the screen to let you know that this item could sell out soon. The highlights section varies object to object, but across listings for historical objects, most will list materials, and then some will have dimension, weight, color, but every single one of them will say vintage from before 1700. And this is Etsy's language. This isn't something that the sellers are putting in themselves. It's how Etsy categorizes the object on their platform. And it seems to undersell the object, at least from the point of view of the seller, because the sellers always put in the first line of the description when they think it's from, and it's often much older than 1700. But it also, as a result, obscures the origin and potentially obscures any criminal activity that may be associated with the object. So the description section is where the sellers can really go nuts and write freely about their item, as you can see here. This is an example of a listing with the entire description opened. I would read you the whole thing, but it's almost 2,000 words, and that would take up all of my time. So I put a couple highlights that you can read there, but basically the description begins with the founding of Bagan and goes into incredible detail about like centuries of this history, political episodes, the economy, religious and cultural life, and even presents pages of prayers and chronicles directly in the description. But what it doesn't do, funnily enough, is give a lot of information about the object itself, and seems to overwhelm potential buyers with information about the culture the object came from, but not the object itself. So again, in my view, obscuring information about the object by giving way more information than is needed in this case. So this is another listing with a very long description. Again, this one's about 1,500 words, and it gives a lot of context about Ban Chang, the UNESCO World Heritage Site in Thailand, complete with full citations, descriptions about the archaeological excavations, and debates over dating methods, which is better, that kind of stuff. About halfway down where I put that arrow, right before the list of sources and notes, so that's half of that is just references. So right in the middle there, the description reads what I've put up here. The site made headlines in January 2008 when thousands of artifacts from the Ban Chang cultural tradition and other prehistoric traditions of Thailand were found to illegally be in several California museums and other locations. The plot involved smuggling the items into the country and then donating them to the museums in order to claim large tax write-offs. There were said to be more items in the museums than at the site itself. This was brought to light during high-profile raids conducted by the police after a National Park Service agent had posed undercover as a private collector. If the US government wins its case, which is likely to take several years of litigation, the artifacts are to be returned to Thailand. Despite the really long list of sources and notes and references, this listing doesn't have any provenance or any sort of indication of documentation about where this object came from. So another contradictory thing here, which is the seller is pointing out the controversy that this object might be involved in without providing any information that would prove that it wasn't one of those objects that was embroiled in the controversy. So these are even more baffling to me. These are quotes, sorry, that I've pulled from some listings from some the 3 shops that I talked about, in which the sellers admit to, if not looting it themselves, at least knowing that these items were recently and unlawfully excavated, because again, there's no type of documentation. So, you know, you have one seller who says, many items I offer are recent finds from riverside excavations and metal detectors. I think my favorite / least favorite one is the one that says, in good condition for a bronze that has spent a couple of millennia in the ground, recently dug, still contains the red soil in which it was found. One would think that all of these things would hurt these shops' business. But like I said earlier, these shops have made hundreds, if not thousands of sales, and they're all very highly rated. 2 of the shops have a 5-star average rating, and one has 4 stars. So this is an example of a review that was left on the shop that admitted the object they sell is might be embroiled in controversy. And this shop actually has some of the most glowing reviews I've ever read on the internet, to be honest. His customers just love him and praise his professionalism and his knowledge and his unique pieces. Oh, sorry, I keep doing that. So this one example, for example, says that they come back on a regular basis, and others say they come back every day to see what he's posted today, if he's posted anything new, but mostly to learn about different cultures and the art that comes from them. This person says, I enjoy sipping a cup of tea and reading the historical and cultural information that is presented for each piece. I believe this seller is really an educator in disguise. I browse his shop and items as if I were in a fine museum. There are so many wonderful pieces and of such high quality, each with a written history. You can't go wrong here. So in fact, what seems like potentially poor strategy, sale of illicit antiquities, or at least unethically sourced antiquities on Etsy, seems to actually work in the seller's favor. It's clear that there's a premium placed on authenticity, or at least the perception of authenticity, which is why that one shop pointed out the soil that's still on the object. It's proof that it's not a fake, that it actually is an archaeological object. The long descriptions are appreciated by buyers who are looking to expand their knowledge. So one reviewer explains, this is my first venture into purchasing Native American pottery. The shop owner is very knowledgeable about his collection. If you're going to start collecting in this area, trust him. And indeed, the sellers gain credibility through these extravagantly long descriptions and their use of academic references in the object descriptions, but also like academic language. Some of them talk about typology, and like I mentioned earlier, one of them talks about different dating methods, isotopic dating versus carbon dating and all this stuff. And it's reflected in the reviews where the buyers are praising this knowledge. So going back to my kind of theoretical inspiration, if I'm viewing Etsy as a field of cultural production with images, symbols, and most importantly, cultural producers, I'm doing this because I want to emphasize that Etsy is participating in diminishing and obscuring the harm that collecting antiquities can pose. This is something that I've seen across the internet. Most of the content that is produced and published online about collecting is aimed at growing interest in collecting. So it's content that portrays it and the art market in general as sophisticated and exciting, and it teaches collectors how to navigate the market. So a guide to sustaining glass, for example. But new collectors are not exposed to content that would teach them about the darker, dangerous, unethical, illegal aspects of the trade. And if they are entering this hobby, this market for the first time, is something that they need to be aware of. And here with Etsy, we have a platform that's not necessarily portraying collecting as sophisticated, but makes it mundane and almost kind of cute and quaint. So this is back to that one of those first slides that I showed you. Language like vintage from before 1700 downplays the significance of the object. It's a vintage item, like you would have a vintage skirt that you got from your mother. And then you set that next to, on this one example, gift wrapping available, and the little sparkly unicorn. There's no association with any potential criminal activity when you look at this. And just in general, Etsy doesn't bring up those kinds of thoughts. I found that when I talk about this to people in my life, they're most of them are not surprised that there's antiquities trafficking on Facebook. But if I tell them you can buy illicit antiquities on Etsy, they're absolutely floored. And so this makes the open discussion of looting on this platform really concerning to me. It just normalizes this as acceptable, and you see it in the way the reviewers respond to it as well. One reviewer said, he stumbled upon this find and I got lucky to stumble upon this shop. So to me, the users of Etsy, but also Etsy's developers and designers, the people who draw the little sparkly unicorns, they all have they're cultural producers on Etsy, in this field of cultural production. And they have a vested interest in creating value for these antiquities and in producing the culture that they are, in the way they're doing this, they are participating, I think, in the laundering of objects and in the normalization of criminal behavior. So I'll kind of wrap it up there. But I just wanted to say that this is kind of a new research for me. It's based on some surveys that I did last year, but this angle is very new. So if anyone has any feedback, I would absolutely love to hear it.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. That was brilliant.